Now, I risk sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but it's no longer a theory. What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communist government. The combining of national governments started with the European Union. That union started with trade agreements, then a common currency, the euro, and now a European Parliament that is feverishly passing laws that override the laws of the member nations. A constitution was drafted but rejected by a few of those nations, but never mind. They implemented it anyway. Now it's North America's turn. Building on the North American Free Trade Agreement, the NAFTA section of the Commerce Department is busy drafting laws and regulations for a North American Union, a union of Canada, America, and Mexico. The President has attended secret meetings and signed at least 2 agreements under the Security and Prosperity Partnership Program. Information leaked out about the meetings, and now it is all in the open. No treaty has been signed, so Congress has not become involved. However, money from our Treasury is now being spent for this effort. We will have a new currency, the Amero, and a new constitution modeled on the Soviet Union's constitution. Our rights will not be inalienable, but they will be granted by government, who can also take them away. One sign that this is our future is the plans for the superhighways from southern Mexico through America and into Canada. These plans are not secret any longer. Huge amounts of property will be taken in the name of free trade, peace, and security. You will have a national ID card with a radio frequency chip in it. That's already law in America and will be implemented by May 2000. This man voted for it. You will not be able to move about freely. This is terrorism of the most worst kind, brought on you by our own government. The strongest, freest nation in the history of mankind will be averaged into world communism. Is that what you want? Are we the people still in control of this nation? We must begin to act like we are.
Thank you. Stan Jones. On that, Conrad Burns, 3 minutes.
Sure glad you got such a rosy outlook on our future for our
security is arguably the critical issue in this country's fight against radical Islamist terrorism. But our borders remain porous, so porous that 3 million illegal aliens entered this country last year, nearly all of them from Mexico. Now, incredibly, a panel sponsored by the Council on Foreign Relations wants the United States to focus not on the defense of our own borders, but rather create what effectively would be a common border that includes Mexico and Canada. Christine Romans has the report.
On Capitol Hill, testimony calling for Americans to start thinking like citizens of North America and treat the U.S., Mexico, and Canada like one big country.
The best way to secure the United States today is not at our 2 borders with Mexico and Canada, but at the borders of North America as a whole.
That's the view in a report called Building a North American Community. It envisions a common border around the U.S., Mexico, and Canada in just 5 years. A border pass for residents of the 3 countries, and a freer flow of goods and people. Task Force member Robert Pastor.
What we hope to accomplish by 2010 is a common external tariff, which will mean that goods can move easily across the border. We want a common security perimeter around all of North America so as to ease the travel of people within North America.
Buried in 49 pages of recommendations from the task force, the brief mention we must maintain respect for each other's sovereignty. But security experts say folding Mexico and Canada into the U.S. is a grave breach of that sovereignty.
That's what would happen if anybody serious were to embrace this strategy for homogenizing the United States and its sovereignty with the very different systems existing today in Canada and Mexico.
Especially considering Mexico's problems with drug trafficking, human smuggling, and poverty. Critics say the country is just too far behind the U.S. and Canada to be included in a so-called common community. But the task force wants military and law enforcement cooperation between all three countries.
Indeed, an exchange of personnel that bring Canadians and Mexicans into the Department of Homeland Security.
And it wants temporary migrant worker programs expanded with full mobility of labor between the three countries in the next 5 years.
The idea here is to make North America more like the European Union. Yet just this week, voters in two major countries in the European Union voted against updating the European Constitution. So clearly, this is not the best week to be trying to sell that idea.
Americans must think that our political and academic elites have gone utterly mad at a time when 3.5 years, approaching 4 years after September 11th, we still don't have border security, and this group of elites is talking about not defending our borders, finally, but rather creating new. It's astonishing.
The theory here is that we are stronger together, three countries in one, rather than alone.
Well, it's a mind-boggling concept. Christine Romans, thank you as always.
Dr. Jerome Corsi is on your screen. He's in Cleveland, and you started a bit of a firestorm on the radio talk shows this week. What was it all about?
Well, Brian, it's a great honor to be with you. I wrote an article in WorldNet Daily in which I'm discussing this new presidential directive. It was a national security and homeland security presidential directive, and the designations of it on the White House website are NS for National Security, PD for Presidential Directive 51, and HS for Homeland Security, PD 20. And Brian, what it did is it defined a national emergency in a very broad terms. It gave the president the ability to declare that a national emergency existed, and then assumed that the president could take up the following powers, which is all national essential functions for continuity of the government, including directing all federal, state, local, territorial, and tribal governments, as well as private sector organizations, which were going to continue functioning under the president's directives in the event of a national emergency. And Brian, I wrote about it because I think this is the most broad definition of emergency powers I've ever seen a president award to themselves, and it really is virtually dictatorial powers, the ability to take over and manage all levels of government, including private sector organizations, and the directives have no indication that to get these powers, the president has to go to Congress. It looks from the language as if the president on his own declaration, President Bush could just say, well, we have an emergency, and there's some very broad definitions of emergency in the Security and Prosperity Partnership working groups. We have an emergency as avian flu, and I'm going to assume all these powers, and I'm now directing even tribal governments. So, Brian, I think it was a very alarming directive.
Beginning in October, the Army plans to station an active unit inside the United States for the first time to serve as an on-call federal response in times of emergency. The 3rd Infantry Division's 1st Brigade Combat Team has spent 35 of the last 60 months in Iraq, but now the unit's training for domestic operations. The unit will soon be under the day-to-day control of U.S. Army North, the Army service component of Northern Command. The Army Times reports this new mission marks the first time an active unit has been given a dedicated assignment to Northern Command. The paper says the Army unit may be called upon to help with civil unrest and crowd control. The soldiers are learning to use so-called non-lethal weapons designed to subdue unruly or dangerous individuals and crowds.
The White House press release included no discussion of why the directive was issued today and what it's about. I called the White House, Tony Snow's office, in preparing for the article, and they declined to comment. So I published the article and said it's really a power grab, and it's quite an alarming usurpation of emergency powers.